When creating a cloche flower arrangement, I like to create flowers that have different heights and textures to create an interesting composition. And in this one, I'm bringing in a bunch of different colors as well. You can decide what your color palette is. Sometimes a monochromatic cloche is actually really pretty, or you could do a mix of colors like I am. So I'll show you how to make all these different flowers, and of course you can explore making some different styles of your own too. So one of the things I like to make for a cloche flower arrangement is different kinds of grasses. It's a nice way to add texture and height, and they're pretty easy to do. I have two different versions here, one that's a little bit more kind of shorter and groomed, and then the other one that has just like longer little strands on it, and it's a little bit more kind of twisted and wild looking. So I'll show you how to make those two versions. First, just if you haven't worked with crepe paper before, one thing you'll notice is that it's got stretch to it, and one direction really expands, whereas the other direction pretty much stays the same. So when you unroll your crepe paper, take a look and just see what side stretches out and what side doesn't. So you know kind of which way to cut the crepe paper to get the stretch going in the direction that you want. In this case, we're going to be cutting strips that will then create a fringe on, and I want the stretch to go this way. So the little fringe that we're cutting will stay the same length, but we can kind of stretch the strip of it wider, if that makes any sense. The other thing that you can do, but you don't have to do, is actually coat your floral wire with crepe paper as well, if you want the whole thing to be kind of monochromatic. Which I think is kind of fun. I did it with these, so I'll show you how, but if you wanted to be more natural looking, you can just do the wire, and of course there's a floral tape that you can wrap around it to make it a little thicker. So I'm going to start by cutting a couple of strips to wrap my stems with. In each of these colors. So I've got full rolls here, but I already cut off sections. I find it easier to work with kind of narrower sections like this and then cut from there. This doesn't have to be super precise cutting, so one shortcut is just to go ahead and fold things over and cut from there. And for wrapping the stem, I don't need a very wide strip, maybe like that. So I'll do one for this, and then I'll do one for this one. So again, I'll just fold it a couple times. There we go. So these are for my stems. And then I already cut one piece for the fringe on this one. And I'm going to start with one piece cut, start wrapping, and then cut and wrap more as needed. But I'm going to just start with one, and then I'll need to cut a piece of crepe paper for this one. So with this, the strip that I cut, this distance here is basically the length of the fringe. So you can just kind of roughly decide how long you want your fringe to be, and then that's the width of the strip that you cut. So this one's a little bit shorter. It's more like a 1/2 inch fringe. Which you can leave a little extra at the bottom so that, you know, you cut your fringe and then you have an area to still glue it to the stem. So I'll make this one more like that. All right, so now I've got two pieces for that one. So I've cut down some wire. I don't need a full length of floral wire for these. I'm just kind of estimating how big I want my grasses to be, and you want to keep in mind the height of your cloche as you're doing this, because if it's too tall you'll have to trim it down, which isn't too big of a deal. I've definitely trimmed down pieces from the bottom before, so if you've got extra space at the bottom, you can then, as you're assembling, just kind of adjust as you go and change the heights. But this is a good starting point for me, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this. And I'm using this glue here. You can use a bunch of different craft glues for this. When it comes to wrapping the stem, I don't usually use the hot glue because it gets kind of lumpy and it's really easy to burn your fingers. Depending on your glue, you might want it to get a little tacky, like let it dry a little bit before you start wrapping the whole thing, because I found that it does want to just kind of slide down the floral wire if I start gluing right away. So I'm actually just gonna dab some glue on there and let it set for a second. Find my other piece here and do the same thing here. Give it a minute or two and then start gluing it. Okay, so now this glue's gotten a little bit tacky, so it'll just do a better job of gripping onto the floral wire. So I'm going to start by pressing the floral wire in at an angle on that one corner and just press this down. And I haven't put glue on the rest of it yet. I just like need to anchor this top portion, and then I can start kind of stretching it, twisting it around the wire, and adding some glue as I go. So I'm just making sure this is pressed pretty well. And then I'm gonna stretch, not the whole thing right now, but just start stretching this out and smoothing it, and it'll be easier to wrap around. So I'll just dab some glue on this kind of first section, just little dots, do not need a lot. And then keeping your eye on the top part to make sure it doesn't start sliding on you, you're gonna twist. And I have this as an angle, so at an angle, so that I can kind of keep pulling it down the wire or the stem here without adding too much bulk. And this doesn't have to be, you know, perfectly smooth. A lot of this will be covered. So I'm just kind of twisting, pulling it down, and just keeping my eye on if I need to add more glue. Stretch this a little bit more and add glue here. And then when you get to the bottom, you can actually even just tear the paper. If you want to, you can use scissors, but it's super easy to just rip. And then you've got a covered stem. So a little extra step, but it looks pretty, I think. So I've got that fuchsia one, and I already did this peach one here. And so next I can add my fringe. So now I'm gonna cut the fringe for each of these grasses. So I'm gonna start with this pink one. This is the shorter cropped fringe. And I'm gonna go ahead and fold this to cut it. And I'm actually going to stretch this as well, just to get the most out of it. And so doing this folding is going to just make the fringe cutting go faster. And so first what I do is where there's folds, I'm gonna go ahead and cut into that, if I can feed my scissors in there. And you're not gonna cut all the way down because you need to leave a little space for the glue, to glue it to the stem. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do one in the middle and then fold again. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and cut fringe along the rest of it. I'm doing pretty skinny little fringy pieces. All right, and if some of this falls apart, it's okay to glue it in multiple pieces. Sometimes you're gonna do that anyway. So it just made it a lot faster to fold that. I stretched this out ahead of time, and I don't plan on doing any shaping of the fringe once I've attached it. You're not always gonna stretch the crepe paper out ahead of time because you might wanna shape petals and fringe, etc. once it's attached. So now that I have this long fringe, I'm gonna be able to glue it on here. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the stem wrap, is just go ahead and add a little glue on one end and let it get a little tacky. So I'm letting this set. I can work on this one. And this one I'm going to actually not stretch it quite as much as I did this one, just a little bit, but we're going to play around with shaping some of this fringe after we cut it. But then I'm going to go ahead and fold. And I cut along these folds just so that when I unfold it, there's not a really chunky piece of fringe on one end, if that makes sense. It just helps to cut them ahead. And there you have it. And this one, I don't know if you can tell, this is like got a little bit of a different shape to it. This is straighter, this is a little bit more wild and twisted looking. And so you can do that by actually twisting the fringe like this. And it gets a different look to the finished grass. And so you're just gonna work your way down. So this is in part why it kind of works to have some thicker pieces of fringe, to have something to really twist. You can shape this after you've added it to the stem. I do think in this case it's easier to just do this twisting ahead of time. So in this case, we're making these really like skinny and wiry and twisty. So to get more a more full stem, we may have to cut another strip of this and cut more fringe. But I like to start with one and just see how it goes once I start wrapping it around. There you go. So same thing, I'll add some glue to one end, and then we'll see if we can start wrapping the other one. Okay, gotta find my glue right there. And so I'm gonna go ahead again and kind of do the same thing I did with the stem, where I just really press down the end and then start adding some glue and wrapping. And I just add a little bit of like sections of glue at a time. One, because it's just easier to work with, so you don't have glue getting on everything and the fringe sticking to things that you don't want it to stick to. But then also sometimes you have more than you need, so you can just save that for a different flower or something like that. So I'm just gradually working my way down, overlapping, so that there's some thickness. This one I'm doing a little bit lighter than this one. This was a really like dense layer. This one's going to be a little bit airier. So again, you can kind of play with whatever look you want. And I'm just pausing to fan some of this out to get a sense of what it will look like if I'm making it full enough. The fuller you want it, the more tightly, closer together the layers of fringe you should roll, and the lighter you want it, you can kind of spread them out more, so you're not rolling it as tightly. All right, so I just really press that in when I get to the bottom, and then you can play around with kind of fanning out the fringe, kind of fluffing it with your fingers to make it just look a little fuller, or you can keep it really slender. All done. So now we're gonna do this next piece, and the technique is exactly the same as what we just did. It's just that now you've got a slightly different style of fringe to work with. There's more gaps in between the different fringes, so you might want to roll it a little bit more densely so that you get a really full looking piece. Now, one thing that's a little different here is it's slimmer at the top and then it gets wider and then it gets narrower again. So that means I kind of, as I rolled at the top, I didn't do as much overlap, and then I did more overlap here, and then I tapered off again. So we'll do the same thing here. So I've gotten to the end of that strip, so I'm gonna go ahead and pinch it off. Even if I'm gonna add more, just really make sure it's like glued down and stuck to that stem. So I've got the shape kind of going from narrow to wide, and I can cut another strip and then keep going and adding more. Or you can even stop there and just have one that looks like this. I kind of like the variety of having both. So if you want yours to go all the way down, just add a second strip, doing the same kind of twisting and gluing as you go. And then if you want to do the trimming, you can start by kind of shaping it with your fingers to make sure everything's kind of nice and full and fluffy. And then from there, determine what you might want to trim. So I might make this a little bit more tapered. And this is not necessary, but it's kind of fun to play around with and good to see how you can shape it with scissors too. That's it. I'm just going to give it a little haircut. I have two different versions. Now that you know how to add fringe to the stems, you can play around with different sizes and proportions. So these are little mini fringe flowers that I made. They're a great way to create fillers in your arrangement. And in these, instead of wrapping all the way down the stem, you really just wrap it around the top so that it's more of a flower than a grass. And then you can play around with, you know, adding more color layers or trimming it to a certain length. And they're super simple and a great way to add texture and fullness. Next, I'm going to show you how to add leaf stems. They're super simple and they, again, add a lot of texture and shape to your arrangement. Sometimes I make just a single little leaf as a filler, and then other times I create branches with multiple leaves for more height and shape to it. Okay, so I already have my covered stem for this, and I'm going to cut out the leaves. Again, I'm going to overlap the paper a few times here. And the height of my leaf, I'm going to have the height of my leaf plus extra to wrap around the stem. So if this is the height of my leaf, then maybe I'll cut like that much of a strip. And then I'm going to cut my leaf shape from here. So this is kind of like an almond shape with a little tab at the end. So I'm going to start with the skinny tab and then go ahead and create that kind of almond shape. You could make these different sizes or the same size. And I'm just cutting through all of the layers at once. Sometimes you have to, when you peel apart the layers, you'll notice one might need to be trimmed a little bit. No big deal, you're still saving some time by cutting through them all at once. So let's see what we've got. So I've got 4 leaves out of that one. I'm gonna cut a few more and I think I'll make the next ones a little smaller. So maybe it'll be a little smaller up towards the top. All right, so now I've got a bunch. And you can shape these, so I didn't mention, but the grain is going vertically here, so you can kind of stretch out the center part of the leaf and make it a little bit more rounded. You don't have to do that, but I think it can be fun to shape them a little bit. Same with these. And I like doing that before I put them on this stem. So I'll probably do maybe like this many. I'm going to alternate them when I put them on there. You can do odd, you can do even, whatever you want. Let's do it like this. So that's what it's going to be like on my stem, roughly. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. And I just add the glue to this little bit here, just on this little tab. Since I'm not really wrapping and pulling a strip down the stem like we were before, I don't really have to wait as long to put it on there. It's less likely to slide because you're not going to be pulling on it. You just press it down and let it be. So I kind of wrapped it around a little bit. It overlapped itself, so I've got the top leaf. And for these other leaves, you'll wrap them a little bit differently, because instead of the stem coming up the middle, you're going to be approaching it kind of from the side. So I put it at an angle there, press down, and then wrap it around. I'm going to slide that up a little bit higher. And you can pinch the crepe paper, it's really easy to mold. And then just keep working your way down. All right, so now I've got that leaf stem all done. Like I mentioned, you can do a lot of different variations, whether it's spacing, leaf shape, leaf size, the number of leaves you add per stem. I usually start with, you know, a few different heights, and then once I start putting everything together, that's when I recognize I might need like some of the singles for fillers. So you can start with maybe 3 to 5 leaf stems and then add as you start putting everything together. Next, I'm going to do more of a rounded kind of ball shape, billy button kind of flower. So we're using fringe again, but we're going to make it more of a sphere. So I'm actually going to start by creating kind of a ball for the middle. And you can use crepe paper. Sometimes I like to just start with some other kind of scrap paper so that I can save the crepe paper for the parts that are visible. This is just like a core that I'm making. I'm just roughly crunching into a ball. I have this ready wrapped stem, so I'm just going to kind of see my shape here and just make sure I have a spot to kind of wedge in the stem. And for this, I'm actually going to use a glue gun. You can use other kinds of glue, but since this is a little bit more of a kind of sculpture we're building, it helps to have something that sets pretty quickly. So I'm just going to dab some in the middle there, and then get the stem in, and then let that set. And then I'm going to add a little glue to anything that's still opening up, just to make it a little easier to work with. And next I'm going to wrap this with some crepe paper. So I'm just going to cut a square of this to wrap around. So I'm going to kind of estimate by just doing this. Actually stretch that. So before I add any glue, I'm just going to get a sense of how it's going to wrap around. Probably have more than I need, so I might trim some of that off. All right, let's get rid of this extra. All right. And really you're only going to see like barely a little bit of that top peeking through. So that's the main thing, and the rest will be pretty well covered up. So I'm gonna do just like a dab in the center. And then I'll put a little at the bottom too and wrap it around. All right, so I have my misshapen little ball that's gonna get all covered up with fringe. So we'll do that step next. So I already cut 3 different strips of fringe. I did one that's a little smaller, so I'll do that one towards the top. I do tend to trim this after the fact, so it's okay if it's a little bit longer. So I think we'll start with this one and place it kind of roughly at the center so that it comes just up above the little ball there. And since I've got the glue gun heated up, I'm going to try using this time. Again, you can definitely use the other glue as well. And I'm just going to do a little dab periodically and start rolling it around. Being careful to not burn my fingers and just kind of stretch it and pull it tight. So I'm gonna do a few layers of this wrapping around so that it gets pretty dense. And then I'll start adding the other layers. Okay, so I've added that first layer of fringe. I'm kind of shaping it so it kind of keeps that ball shape. And then I'm going to add some more layers of fringe. I might trim this a little bit to shape it as I go. I'm thinking, sometimes I shape it afterwards, but with these top layers, I think I'm gonna just do a little bit of shaping now. So that you can just see the different layers. All right, now I'm gonna add the next layers. All right, so this is getting nice and round. I'm gonna add a little bit more fringe, but I think I have enough fullness, so I'm gonna start to go with shorter fringes to bring it back down and around. So I'm gonna take this one that I have and just give it a little haircut so that it's shorter. So I think like, yeah, just holding it up there helps a little bit. I'll take a little off the bottom too. All right, and I might not use this whole thing because that might be more than I need. So I think I have enough fringe on this, so I'm gonna just go ahead and add some yellow down here, just a strip to kind of transition from the bloom to the stem. All right, now I have the stem covered. You can kind of fluff all the little fringy pieces. If you want to give it more of a haircut, you can to shape it, or you can just kind of get it nice and fluffy, and then you're done. Next, we're going to do a straw flower. Straw flowers come in all different colors, and they add a nice focal point to the arrangements. You know, they look a little bit different than all the other flowers. It's more petal than fringe, although there is some fringe in the center. So if you look at this, there's kind of 3 different layers. There's the core. There's a piece of paper or crepe paper we'll just wrap around the stem. Then there's a little fringe section, and then you get to the petals. So we're gonna do all of those layers. Another thing that I did differently with this one is I actually added a little watercolor paint to the crepe paper just to get a little variation in the color. So totally optional, but I will show you how easy it is to do that if you choose. So I've got a few strips here. This is gonna be my very center core that I wrap around the stem. This will be my fringe. And then these will be petals, and I may add more depending on how full it feels. So I'm gonna go ahead and set these aside and then add watercolor to these strips. All right, so I added some scrap paper underneath my strips of crepe paper because we're gonna be painting off of the edges. I've got my little watercolor set here. You could use other paints too. Usually most people have watercolor, and it's really easy to work with. And I'm just doing kind of a blushy, brownish, orangey tone to these. And I'm not painting the entire thing. I'm kind of doing almost like an ombre-ish effect with them. And so I'm just gonna play with some color here and blend a bunch. I get the color I like, and then I'm going to start adding it. So for me, I like it when the very edge is the most vibrant, and then it kind of fades a little bit. So I'm adding the color starting at one side, and then I'll just kind of blend a little bit and fade it out as it gets closer to the other side. If you oversaturate your crepe paper, you're gonna lose all the crinkle. You'll lose a little bit of the crinkle anyway with this process, but just so you know, if you like go really heavy on the water, you might lose some of that. So I try to do just enough to kind of spread the color around without going overboard. There, so you just paint along the edge like that. And I'm gonna do that to all of these. Okay, I'm all done. I actually went ahead and painted both sides just so that no matter which angle the petal or fringe is at, you can see a little bit of that color, and now I'll let it dry. Before you start assembling your flower arrangement in your cloche, you're gonna need to actually cut the foam in half. Just if you look at the height of this, cloche, you want to make sure that this doesn't take up too much space and dominate the look of your arrangement. So I prefer to cut it in half. So you've got something like this size. You can actually use floral wire to kind of center it and then pull through to cut your foam in half. And then when I put it in there, I put the flat side down and then start arranging in the side that I had cut. So that'll fit in there. And then as we arrange, we'll just keep the lid, the glass dome close by so we have a sense of height. Before I add my arrangement, I'm gonna prep my base so that I cover up the green and also add some dimension with some grass-like fringe. So I've cut a few pieces, and with one of them, I will be just wrapping it around to cover that green and add some texture. And then I'm going to experiment with layering some grasses on the interior. So I went ahead and used an X-Acto to cut a groove. You don't want to cut all the way down because then this inner circle will just pop out, but I just created a place to be able to slide in some more fringe so it looks like kind of tiered layers of grasses. And this one's taller than the outer one. So I'm gonna just go ahead and follow the groove. Let me see if I've got enough here. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna need to stretch this. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start digging it into that cutout I made. I'm gonna get it all in here, and then I'll probably go back around and push it in a little bit more deeply. So I'm using my scrap paper from the Watercolor because the foam tends to shed and get all over the place, so it helps to just have a little placemat for all that. Cool, so I have this all in here, but I'm just gonna push it down further to really get it in there. And then I'll probably give this a haircut eventually, but I'm gonna wait until I've done some arranging to get a better idea of how short I should cut it. So I didn't stretch this crepe paper fringe, and that's important because it's nice and stiff right now, so I'm actually able to really push it through the foam. If I had stretched it, it probably would just be too soft and supple to actually go down there, so just a tip there. Okay, so I've got my inner layer. I'm gonna add this outer layer. Which I could probably do more than one layer around here. But I also might be adding like little leaves and stuff in between. So I like to kind of do a couple pieces and then start putting the other elements together before adding more layers. So we'll put this outer layer on next. So for attaching the outer layer, I actually am making little staples out of the floral wire. The glue and foam don't work great together, so that's one reason. It's also nice that this will allow me to reposition things if I decide I want to change some things up. So I'm just basically going to stretch this around. Overlap it and then puncture through. And press it in. There you have it. Okay, so I'm going to start my straw flower by adding this very center core piece. And I'm going to do that by just wrapping around this strip, which is roughly 1/4 of an inch wide. I'm going to put the leaves aside for now. I'll probably add those last. So I'm just going to do a dab of hot glue. This is definitely an element that will want to slide as you add layers. So the hot glue comes in handy. And so as I'm rolling, I'm just trying to keep everything even. I don't want to create a tapered effect here. I want it to roll directly on itself. And then I'm actually just going to trim this little extra piece off. All right, so now it's time to add the fringe and then the petals. Okay, so this paint is dry, so I'm gonna go ahead, this is the narrowest strip, which is roughly 1/2 inch, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut the fringe. So I'm cutting from the side that has the paint on it. And again, if you cut all the way through by accident, it's not a big deal. You can always add it on in multiple layers. So this is just going to go onto my center, so it's a little taller than the center is, and I'm just going to wrap it around. And can kind of give it a little fluff. And the next thing we're going to do is cut out the petals and layer them on. Okay, so these are dry. These are a little over an inch wide. This one's a little bit shorter, so I'll do that on the interior. So I'm going to cut the petal shapes, and I'll probably do less folding for this because I want my petal shape to be a little bit more exact than when we're doing fringe. So we're basically going to be cutting in like little almond slice kind of shapes from the colored edge in towards the unpainted edge. So I'm going to start and angle it in. So I'm on the fold there, so I just basically cut half of a petal shape. But you unfold it and it looks like that. And we're going to cut a series out. They'll almost be touching at the bottom, but not quite. And sometimes I just flip the strip of paper over so that it's easiest angle for me to cut at. So you can cut out that center so you can see what we're doing here. Now I'm going to cut the other side of the petal. So creating petal shapes like that, and there's gaps in between them. I might do some where the petals are even closer together, but just to give you a sense of how the overall shape of the petals is. And so I cut out that centerpiece before, but I find it easier to just do all the petal shapes and then come back to those little centers and cut out any extra after I'm done all of these. So you can fold over more so that you have to do less back and forth. So you're cutting through more layers at a time. Sometimes I feel like with the petals, by the time I unfold it, I have fewer petals than I thought because the spacing is a little bit hard to tell when you've got so many layers folded up. And these are a little, you know, wonky shape. If you want something super precise, you could always trace it with pencil. But when all is said and done, you kind of, you know, shape them with your fingers and make them a little pointy at the ends and a little wild looking. So precision isn't really necessary for this kind of flower. All right, I'm just gonna get rid of the rest of this because it's kind of a weird amount left over. And then I'm gonna bend down all of the little extra middle places and cut them out. Or you can rip them out too. All right, so those are our petals. So we're gonna go ahead and cut that out of all of the strips. Okay, so I have all my petals cut out, so I'm gonna start gluing them on using the hot glue, starting with the shortest petals. I'm going to be attaching them to the center here. I'm going to start with the first ones up a little bit higher so it's not all the way down to the base. And as I glue it on, every once in a while I'll pleat it so that it just keeps radiating out and kind of has a little bit more dimension. Can also help close any gaps between flowers. And so we'll keep layering like that. Unfortunately, my plug for the glue gun's on my left side. Otherwise, I'd have a little bit better setup here, but hopefully you've got a good setup where you can have your glue gun on the right side of you. So I'm going to let this just cool slightly before I start layering on the next layer of petals. And also I'm just going to play with these a little bit. I didn't really stretch these petals out before I added them. I'm kind of going gradually from kind of smaller to bigger. So I will probably sculpt the other petals a little bit to make them even bigger as I add more layers. You can also pinch and twist to get like more of that like sharp look that straw flowers tend to have. All right. So I'm going to go ahead, stretch these slightly. You can also kind of create a cupped shape by pushing in on the petal like that so that it kind of cradles the center. You can see the profile of it. Okay, so let's see. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and add it roughly the same place as I wrap around. There's a chance I might go down a little bit lower, but I'm going to start roughly the same spot based on the height of the petals. So what we're going to start doing is pulling the petals out so the center petals stay kind of curled in, and then as we go outwards we kind of open them up. So we can do that a little bit with this layer that's glued on, and then definitely more with the next layer. So make sure this is cool enough that it's not going to get repositioned. You can start pulling down that layer to get a sense of how full it's getting and to create that openness. All right, so you can see it taking shape. Just one more layer to go. I'm going to do this layer lower down because we're going to really open this up. I'm just letting it cool a little bit until I can do my final flower petal sculpting. So starting from the outside, I'm going to start pulling these down. All right, I kind of like that the way it is right there with those layers. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pinch. You don't have to do all this shaping. Really, a flower can totally change what it looks like depending on how you shape the petals. So you can do something different with it if you want, but I'm gonna go for that like pointy straw flower kind of look. So this is a little bit of a smaller straw flower than this one. Since I already have a big one like this for my arrangement, I'm gonna keep this one small because I like that variety. If you want a bigger one, you just basically keep adding those layers of petals. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is add my leaves to the stem here. And so we're gonna do that just the way we did with those leaf stems earlier. And I've got 2 leaves that I'm gonna add to this one. So since I have my hot glue ready to go, I'm just gonna use that, but you can use any kind of glue. I'm gonna stretch these leaves out a little bit and just stagger them on the stem. I like to do one higher and one lower. Once you have that glued on there, you can kind of shape that. You also don't have to do leaves, or you could do smaller leaves. You could just do the buds, and then depending on how things fill up in your arrangement, always add leaves later. Totally up to you. And then just shaping them with my thumbs. And if you want to have more of a taper or a thicker stem, you can add more crepe paper around there. But this is mainly going to be hidden, and I just am eager to assemble it, so I'm going to leave that the way it is. But that's how you make straw flowers. Okay, so I have all of my flowers that I made and leaves. I've got my center prepped with a couple of layers, and then I'm going to work with it on the base, but have the cloche nearby so I can just understand the height of things to see if I've got things too tall, too short. It helps to come up with what is your tallest thing. So this is really as high as I can go, so I can kind of compare if there's anything else that's taller than that. I may need to give it a trim. So if you have experience flower arranging, you probably can just dive right in, but if you're looking for tips, I try to kind of get what is my hero focus flower first and kind of start building from there. So I have a bunch of these straw flowers. It's also nice to like lead with some of the height of these grasses, and then I tend to plug in the smaller pieces and leaves a little bit later, or just kind of next to these as I go if I get a good sense of composition. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So you're gonna just kind of stick it straight into the foam. You can go straight up and down, you can go at a little bit of an angle, and then as you shape things, you can bend the stems so that you can see things from all directions. Depending on where you display your cloche, you may want it to be a 360 design, which I think most people would want. You can see in all sides, but if you know it's going to be on a shelf against a wall and you are only going to see one side of it, you could focus more on angling things to that side. But it might help you to kind of spin things as you go to get a sense of the composition. I like to work with odd numbers. Not to say I won't do even numbers, but I think for especially some of those main pieces, it helps to have odd numbers. I also kind of keep my eye on balancing the color. Let's see about this one maybe in the center. So I may or may not add that other one. It's nice to have the freedom to reposition, but also keep in mind you can put so many holes in the foam that it kind of starts getting too holy to really control where things are sitting. You also have to keep in mind that this has a narrow opening, so every once in a while I may kind of see how wide I'm going and then adjust as needed. You can also save some of these for in between these layers that we created. So in between those two fringe layers. All right, so I'm gonna add some of these white leaves. I'm getting pretty full, but I still have some fun yellow pieces to add. So I do wish this yellow piece was taller so that I could have it popping up here. So I can go ahead and extend that and just kind of hide the fact that it's extended. So first I'm going to figure out how tall. Roughly there. And then I'm going to cut this down. So I could hot glue this. I could create a wrap with more crepe paper. I've cut this so there's some overlap, so I'm basically going to create a joint there. You could do a leaf there if you wanted to kind of hide the joint. Or you could also just do the floral tape. So for the sake of time, I'm going to start with this floral tape, which basically just, if you haven't used it before, you stretch it around and pull it tight. It's not like your usual tape. So now I have a pretty secure joint, and then I could go ahead and like cover that up with some of this crepe paper. I'm gonna go ahead and just stick it in my arrangement for now. I don't think I'm even gonna be able to see it. Okay. It's a little too tall, so we'll just trim the end a bit. There we go. And then I've got this little baby yellow one here I'm gonna pop in somewhere, maybe right here. So just trying to keep it balanced and full. I think I've got a pretty good amount in here. You could play more with this grassy layer. You could pinch it, twist it, add more leaves in it. Really, the design is up to you. Now I've got a couple more elements I could add. I've got these two peachy ones that I may go ahead and add just to bring more balance to that peach color. Maybe one right here. And then a shorter one here. And one more little leaf. So I'm just gonna find where it looks like there's a hole, which actually looks pretty even. I can always move it if I see that hole later. I'm gonna put it here for now. Okay, feel pretty good about this. Now I just have to slide the cloche over top. So you have to kind of pull everything in a little bit to do that. And if you have to rearrange some things to get it on, then you just can slide this back off again and do any adjusting that you need. And sometimes you have to kind of slide it to get it centered once it's in there. There you have it. So I might make the adjustment to angle this flower facing out a little bit. Otherwise, I feel pretty good about the rest of it. So I'm gonna see if I can just pull this out part way. You could also stick like a pencil or something to poke any petals. It's a little bit better. There you go. And now you have your finished cloche design. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to see your paper flower cloches. So if you post your design to Instagram, please tag us, #PaperSource.